We are live.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome to MicroMania Film Festival, the social justice and micro panel discussion. We have 3 excellent filmmakers, 1 excellent artist host by the name of Annette Daniels Taylor. I am Léwugà Costello, festival director and creator. I'm just going to take a moment to thank our sponsors and tell you about the other events that are coming up. And then I will pass everything off to Annette. So special thanks to our sponsors, Indie Vice, Native Spirit, Argle Bargle, the game where you insult your friends, and Free Agent. And also a mention to Black Girl Film Club, Mystic Road Films, Caramac Studio, and Alicia Ripley. Thank you so much to everyone. Now, real quick, we have a couple more panel discussions coming up later in the week, starting with Wednesday at 12 p.m. We have Comedy and Micro hosted by Mark Duplass. Then we have Queer Voices in Micro at 4 p.m. This is Wednesday. Did I say that? It's Wednesday at 4 p.m. Queer Voices in Micro, hosted by Melissa Talkic. Then on Thursday, the 30th at 4 p.m., we have Micro Indigenous, hosted by Kim Wheeler. And Friday, last but not least, at 11 a.m., we have Women in Micro, hosted by Tilke Hill. Take it away, artist, filmmaker, extraordinaire, Annette Daniels Taylor. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone. It's nice to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Léwugà. This is MicroMania Film Festival Social Justice Conversation with 3 amazing young filmmakers. We have poet Jillian Hanesworth, Maria Ta, and Léwugà Benson. I am so excited to be here today. Can everyone hear me well?
Yes.
Oh, we got you.
Good, I have a fan. Good, I have a fan blowing. Everyone looks so wonderful. And I think I'm going to start by just asking each of you to talk about why filmmaking, why microfilms. Maria, can you start with us?
Sure, I can start. I am not a filmmaker at all. I accidentally got into it because of a different project. I was asked to create something during this quarantine with a group of Vietnamese artists to rediscover our heritage, discuss how we view ourselves and our identity. And many drafts later, I decided to try animation film and try to tell a story through that medium to see how that would go out. And people loved it enough, including Léwugà, to ask me to join some film festivals with it. So here I am. I'm kind of a filmmaker by accident.
Well, that's all right. Can I ask another question before we go to Jillian and Léwugà? Did you do all the animation yourself?
I did. Over about 3 days, I had to get it done because naturally I couldn't plan ahead and figure out how many thousands of photos I'd have to take in order to get that stop motion to be 5 minutes. But yeah, I did all of the animation for that.
That was great. I was really impressed because I knew you previously as an actor, performer, and to see your film work at the stop animation, I was really impressed with that, as well as the story itself. So thank you for jumping into that and being a filmmaker by accident. So Jillian, what brought you to filmmaking? Because I know you are a poet at heart, although many storytellers are poets at heart. Shakespeare was a poet, and he alluded that all playwrights were in fact poets. So it seems like a really obvious transition, poetry to filmmaking. So can you tell us a little bit about how you entered that?
Yeah, so I'm also not a filmmaker. I am a poet, spoken word artist, and an activist. And for the past few years, I've been using my poetry to try to inspire some sustainable community change, put some momentum into the community to really call for the changes we need and to also hold our elected officials accountable for making those changes. So my film partner, who is the person who actually did film this, his name's Steve Rosenthal. He's amazing. And he saw me perform one day and he's like, hey, we've just been partners ever since. So yeah, he's the brains behind it. I just write the words.
Well, as a writer, poet, and speaking to all of you, I would say that it's very difficult to get work started if we don't have a script. Whether that script is narrative, fictional, or nonfiction, documentary, we need the questions to ask, and we need the person that we're asking the questions of help lead us into the direction that the film's going to be made. And that would take us to a very nice segue to Léwugà, who created this mutt, which is, I would say, of course, an experimental documentary, though. It tells us a nonfiction story of an event that happened, but it doesn't tell us the story in the way that we're used to being told stories. So first, I'd like to hear about why you chose filmmaking, Léwugà, and then maybe later on, afterwards, you can talk about your process of your practice, or maybe this particular film, this mutt.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good question. The film wasn't really presented in a way to the way we typically see Black bodies represented in the media, right? Oftentimes when we see Black bodies represented in the media, it's negative, right? It's, this Black person did something bad, and somehow that's supposed to justify them being murdered by the police or justify some kind of excessive police interaction with who they are as a person. So this film was an opportunity for me to not only focus on a single isolated contingency that deals with racial injustice and deals with police brutality, but take an opportunity to sort of broaden the scope and make it a more larger story that consists of other stories of Black people experiencing police brutality on the hands of pretty much state-sanctioned or state authorized individuals to commit these acts, AKA police officers. And I just want to make it clear, because the way I'm talking about it, it sounds a little bit aggressive, or it sounds like maybe there's a vendetta against the police or just people who commit these crimes on Black bodies. But hopefully the story is a little bit different than that, because it wasn't entirely about that. It was also about humanity. It was also about just giving us an opportunity to just be in the space, in the filmmaking space, but in a different way.
In the film This Mutt, because you just mentioned that there are a number of times when police officers refer to human beings as something else. In one instance, they are a demon,
right?
And another, they are mutts. So first, we're seen not as human; we're seen as a particular kind of animal, but not a puppy. He wasn't called a puppy.
Right.
He was called a mutt.
Right.
And
that's very specific too. And I sorry to cut you off there, but just the language in general that's been used to address Black people or identify Black people has always been one that's always controversial, but one that's always been aggressive and always stereotypical. It never justifies who we are as an individual. It never justifies our complexities as individuals. So with this film, I was really trying to focus on that word and play. It's a play on words almost on that idea about Black people being animals, but in a sense, when we talk about mutt, a mutt is really a mixture of different kind of animals. So what I was trying to do was trying to really emphasize how, yeah, it's derogatory, but it's also really complex. But why are we focusing on the negative aspect of this, you know? So yeah, sorry to cut you off, but yeah.
No, please, thank you. And with that, I would say, Maria, your film, you don't focus on the negatives. Your film is more about family and the idea of family being isolated because of the pandemic, and one specific kind of isolation, you know, like going out restaurants, you know, socializing in that way, and how you give a gift to your mother and your parents, and then you talk about how that gift is reciprocal. I really enjoyed the contrast between, say, watching your film and Léwugà's and Jillian's, because the other part about it is talking about the immigrant community coming here and making a home. Can you talk a little bit about some of the sacrifices your parents, you talk about it in the film, sacrifices your parents had to make coming here and finding the American dream, per se, and how it relates to your film?
Sure. So the COVID Chronicle 2, the film, is actually part of a larger series of writings that I produced over the course of this pandemic. And they're all based on the observations I've made of my parents during this time. So I have been able to witness their growth as people and as Americans and as parents over the last couple of months, because for many of us who are adult children who may be quarantined with our parents, this is the first time in our lives since we were very young that we are with our parents for such a long period of time. So it granted me an opportunity to see them beyond mom and dad. I saw them as lovers, as partners, and was able to explore a little bit more about their story. So both of my parents are Vietnamese refugees. They came over towards the end of the Vietnam War. Buffalo was their landing zone. My mother was sponsored by an Italian church over on the west side. My father has not spoken about his path over to the United States, so I don't know much about his journey over. But they met when they arrived in the United States. They had not known each other back in Vietnam, dated while they were here, and then started a family. But for them, they were two people who had no idea what the United States was about beyond their experience with U.S. troops in Vietnam. That was their only really interaction with Americans is in the view of a war, of trying to be liberated from the Communist Party in Vietnam. So when they came over to America, it was an opportunity for them to have a new start, an opportunity for them to give their children a new start. So that was very much a large part of my upbringing. I'm the firstborn, I'm the oldest in the family. I'm also a girl, so I'm kind of like this golden child that they put all their hopes and dreams into, which was very, very tough for me and for a lot of firstborn children of refugee and immigrant parents to kind of carry that load with you. But it's true that what they pour into me, I have been able to give back in tenfold. They have been able to not only provide me with a home, but countless opportunities to grow as a person, considering they didn't speak the language, they didn't know the culture, they didn't know how to make a living for themselves. And somehow they were able to raise two beautiful children in this new country and see so much potential in the future. So for my parents, a lot of what I see now is the hope for what's next. So we're surrounded by this pandemic and, of course, the racial tension that's happening in the United States. And I'm a little lucky because what Léwugà was talking about in terms of being a mutt, I am a mutt. So like that term and that phrase from his film never came across to me as a negative because my parents are both mixed. I'm very, very mixed. I do not look like other Vietnamese people. I'm Vietnamese, African American, Cambodian, Indian. I got a little French in me. Who knows? I'm a lot of things, which causes me to pause often when it comes to conflict and really dive deeper into things. And those are the conversations I've been able to have with my parents during this time.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you so much. So with that, Jillian,
yes,
because Maria was just talking about, when people come to this country from somewhere else, when they immigrate here, or when they are sent here because their country is warring or natural disasters have caused them to become refugees, that creates change within their lives, and that creates change within the communities that they come in. And change is simply another word for revolution. So with your film, which is I call it I was telling someone about it. I said, oh, she wrote this poem, which is sort of a tribute to Gil Scott's Heron, The Revolution Will Not Be Televised. And so she takes it to another level. She takes it to the 21st century, which I think I remember seeing Gil Scott Heron talk about what he meant when he said the revolution won't be televised. And he was saying because it will be happening in real time.
Yeah.
We won't have time to televise it because it will be a revolution of the heart and the mind and the activity that is happening. And so when I was listening and reading your words, because I love the fact that Steve has your text on the screen, because it really helps us, like it helps it to plant the seed inside. When you are discussing the revolution as an activist and a poet, mm-hmm. What is your vision? Like when you say your words, what does the revolution look like to you?
So to me, first of all, the concept of the revolution will rhyme is supposed to be a piece that draws a parallel between social movements and art. Art has always steered and moved social movements forward. Even when you look at the civil rights movement, how comedy was like the thing that kept people sane throughout that movement. So that was like what one of the ideas was behind it. But the rest was just like, we're so used to being in a world where we're influenced by celebrities. You know, there's a line about like Jay-Z in the NFL and Colin Kaepernick, and we're so wrapped up in pop culture and in social media that the only way that we can like push this revolution forward is if we understand that can't be the only place that it happens. So if you are a social media activist, okay, that's fine. There are people on your social media who needs to hear what you have to say. But at some point, you got to close Instagram. You got to close Facebook. You got to put your phone down, and you actually have to be boots on the ground to make things happen, because social media, that part of the movement, is only one aspect, and it cannot be the only one. There's a part where I say you won't have to double tap to see its heart. So on Instagram, when you like have to double tap pictures to like it, we don't have to do that. We don't have to tap in that way because it's happening regardless. It's going to happen regardless. And that's something that we're seeing, and it makes me so happy. I feel so good about it, because regardless of the downsides to why the revolution is necessary, regardless of the fact that this revolution has been necessary for hundreds of years, the fact that we're fighting the same fights our grandparents fought, we're here. And now we are demanding change, and we are being relentless about it. And we are not taking no for an answer. And if I ever have children, they will not be out in the streets marching for the same things I'm marching for. It will not happen. I can't let that happen. So that's kind of the theme behind this poem. We have to use all the tools we have, and we have to use art, and we have to push this revolution forward, because if we don't do it, our kids are going to inherit the same systematic oppression that we are feeling every single day. And it's just not okay. It can't happen. So
Definitely. I definitely feel it can happen. I am actually, when I went into graduate school 4 years ago, obviously I was the oldest person in most of my classes, and we had a lot of conversations about the way the world is or was at that time 4 years ago. And that's when the man in the White House was running for office. And there were many in my class who were white Americans or, identify as white, and many from other parts of the world. And I would say our international students didn't really understand a lot of the things that the racial biases and the civil rights that we're always demanding. And I made a couple of films and I would talk about them. And it wasn't until recently, some classmates of mine that were from China sent me some messages saying that, Annette, I get it. I understand your films now. Like, I always enjoyed watching them. I thought they were interesting, but now I understand what it is you meant, because I kept, there were a lot of times when I would enter the classroom and we would start these conversations that were started often by the professor in charge. And I was so frustrated. I'm 55 and this has been going on. The Voters' Right Act was signed when I was born.
Yeah.
And we are still, we're still crying and we're started hashtagging, and I'm still seeing young boys and girls being killed by police officers. So my hopes were really completely dashed. I was like, there was no hope for this country until George Floyd. And it's like, the man didn't ask to die. The man didn't want to be a martyr. The man didn't expect to have his name a hashtag and to start the revolution. And, a long time ago, I spoke to an Indian a prophet. We were having a long chat about the terrible things that go on in the world and why God would allow such awful things to continue happening every century. And he said something really interesting to me. He said, sometimes these things happen in order for other greater things to happen. And if you look at some of the worst, the most awful tragedies in the world, oftentimes what happened afterwards was what that person wanted, or that was what needed to happen. So I'm not saying that George Floyd or Breonna Taylor or Emmett Till or Martin Luther King's death were necessary evils. But what I am saying is that the fact that those humans died and other humans jumped up and started fighting and listening and hearing, like they woke up, like I am so amazed and so grateful to be here now, like 20, that's what happened. Like, people saw that man dying, getting killed in the street, and it sparked a global revolution, like for African American lives. And then we all like started to realize that, Maria Todd's family being a mutt and coming here, like, if we could awaken ourselves to the fact that we are human and think about real human rights, if there were things that weren't natural disasters that made people leave their countries. We could have flourishing, thriving communities all over the world. But we have all of these individuals, some whom we vote into office, continuing the same old. I made it, I got it. Oh, I'm not gonna get elected again unless, but we have artists like Jillian and Léwugà and Maria who are activists. So you turn off your social media and you either go out and march, you lobby, you do your own lobbying for laws to be changed, new laws to be passed, or you make films, you write poems, you create plays and performances, and you do that. You activate like that. Can you talk about activating change through art making? And anyone can pick it up. I'm really interested in what you think about being an artist, activator, activist. Like, want me to call somebody?
So
go.
I'll go.
Okay.
I think one thing that's very special about art is that it connects people. I remember performing once, and I was performing a poem about Willie Lynch and about the way slaves were treated and the parallel it draws to the way Black people are treated, the systematic oppression, the breaking the system as opposed to fixing the system, because it's fixed, it's functioning the way it was intended to function. And I remember performing this poem, and I was standing in front of this white man. And the whole time I was performing, his arms were crossed like this, and he was like frowning. And the way he was looking at me was like almost like with hate. It was just like, it was so intense. But, I was making eye contact with him because, I'm not going to turn away. I'm not going to change the message. It still needs to be said, whether you want to hear it or not. And after that performance was over, I went to the back, and he walked over to me. He was in tears. And he was just like, I didn't know. I just didn't know. And I think art presents things to people in a way that makes them see beyond just what you're saying and connects them to how you're saying it. Because if I were to get up and read that poem as an essay, but I wasn't showing the passion and I wasn't showing the pain behind the words, he may not have connected to the story as well as he did. So I feel very blessed that this happens to be my gift, because I found that it really does connect people and draw people in a way that just the words on paper may not do. So if I could choose any other way to activate my community and activate myself, I wouldn't even, I wouldn't. Art is just, it's always been my way. It's always been my vehicle. So I'm very proud of that.
That's great. You know what? I'm getting a message. Is that Teresa and Lucia? Do you want to show the films now? Just hurry up and tell me, or else I'm going to go to Léwugà and he's going to chat.
That sounds good.
And if you want to show the film now, I would suggest you show Revolution right now, and then we can go and we can speak to Léwugà, and then he can talk about what I just asked. Okay? And the audience can see what Jillian was talking about. Is that good? All right. So we're going to do that. Léwugà, get your statement ready. We're going to show Jillian's film, Revolution, and then we're going to come back to you, and you're going to have a really cool statement ready for us about art and activism. All right? So we're ready, Lucia? And audience, get ready for poet Jillian Hanesworth's film with director Steve Rosenthal. With director Stephen Rosenthal. The film is called Revolution. Sit back and relax. 5 minutes. Amazing. Can we see
How's it going, Teresa? Here we go.
The revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be streamed live on Facebook, Twitter, or IGTV. You will not be able to start it over. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be streamed live on Facebook, Twitter, or IGTV. You will not be able to start it over if you missed a part, and you won't need to tap it twice to see its heart. The revolution will not be brought to you by Nike, the NFL, or Jay-Z. We will watch it succeed in HD without taking a knee. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution will be live. The revolution will thrive, and the revolution will rhyme. The revolution will be led by Black women who are just tired enough to do it ourselves. It will be rhythmic enough to follow the beat using drums and tambourines, focusing on the 2 and the 4 like a secret language that comes naturally. It will get louder when it's calling for the people's attention and quieter when it needs the people to listen. People listen. The revolution will be direct and unwavering without concern of being looked at as angry. It will be as big and natural as a Black Panther's afro without worrying about opportunity. It will be as interwoven as locks, but there will be nothing dreadful about it. And when light shines on the revolution, it will create a halo around it. The revolution will rhyme. It will be syncopated. It will harmonize. It will be call and repeat. The revolution will rhyme. The revolution will leave no one behind. It will not be developed just to be displaced. Its purpose will not be extracted and refocused or repurposed, and the burden of education and comfort will not be placed on the oppressed, while tolerance and understanding is gifted to the oppressors. You will not be able to DVR the revolution, rewinding the comfortable triumphs and fast forwarding through the hurt. You will not be able to binge watch the revolution or avoid spoiler alerts or save it for a day that you choose to see its worth. You will not be able to mute the revolution, for it will be loud. And you will not be able to shame the revolution, for it will be proud. The revolution will rhyme. It will hold your attention and retain your momentum. It will float like a butterfly and sting like a bee. It will hit even harder than Muhammad Ali. It will stand on the shoulders of those who died on their knees screaming, "You can take me from my freedom, but you can't take my freedom from me." The revolution will hold this country accountable, forcing it to keep its promises. Promises that guarantee life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It will be a sight to behold. It will be so cinematic that Ava DuVernay will create a documentary about it, a complete overhaul, not just a quick fix. The revolution will rhyme. It may not always be politically correct, and it will not be required to forgive and forget. The revolution will remember all those who crosses its path with a message fierce enough to make the opposition fear its wrath. It will the shadow of death without regret of its path, and it is coming for what it is owed and refuses to settle for half. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution will be live. The revolution will thrive, and the revolution will rise.
And we're back.
Thank you.
You're unmuted. The revolution will rhyme.
Okay.
Yes, so I definitely see
That was so good.
Thank you.
definitely activating action. So when we talk about like, oh, well, what was it? It was happening like the first couple of weeks after the demonstrations and the marches started happening, and we started seeing like little posts and shorts about like, what have you accomplished? What have you accomplished?
Yeah.
We're accomplishing action. People are actually out of their house, listening, talking to each other. We've accomplished community.
Yeah.
Before other things started happening, that's what I was thinking. We're accomplishing community. So that was so great. Every time I hear when people say, well, what could I do? I'm only one person. Yeah, you are. One person wrote like a ton of books in the library, didn't they? One person directed a whole bunch of films in the archive, didn't they? Like one person can make a whole wardrobe of clothes by themselves in a sewing machine, can't they? Well, I don't know. What can you do? You know, one person can start a restaurant and feed thousands of people every year. What can you do? I know a woman that had 21 children. That was one person, made 22, made 21 people. So anyway, I could go on, and Léwugà won't get a chance to talk about activating action through art making before we show the smut, which is going to leave people a little hope in it. I have to warn all of you. So I'm not showing, we won't be showing the films in the order that I saw them. Anyway, tell us a little about that, Léwugà, from your perspective.
Yeah, before I do that, I just want to say, Jillian, that was a really beautiful film. Like,
Thank you.
congratulations. Yeah. My film is actually kind of like a representation of kind of what Jillian was talking about, right? It's all of those words and, all of the questions that are in those words kind of realizing itself, manifesting itself. So my film really is concerned about representation of Blackness and how Blackness is represented in the media, and kind of dissecting it and trying to reconceive it in a way that questions the popular narrative about Black representation in media. And by narrative, I mean when Blackness is represented in media, it's oftentimes negative, it's oftentimes degrading, it's oftentimes, suggesting that, the individual deserved to die somehow. And my film is just, trying to challenge that in a creative, experimental way.
Really does, and we'll talk about it a little more after we see it, because there are some things about the film itself that I want to. Hello. Hi.
That's my dad, everybody. Hi.
Is that that's his dad? Oh, you two do things together. That's fabulous.
Yeah.
That's great. Léwugà, what are you doing? Promote your films. There were some things there were some techniques that you used in your filmmaking that I want to discuss, or at least in this film, that I'd like to discuss after we see it. And because I think it's really telling in the way we're used to hearing stories told to us. So, and yours is very different. So, Teresa, Lucia, whenever you're ready, I love this. Like, we're gonna go right to the videotape now of the mutt. This mutt. Because the words are very.
Hey, Teresa. You got it? Well, let me just add real quickly. Also, Jillian has another poem that's available to stream on Vimeo on MicroMania called Little Black Boy, which is just as powerful and moving, and I highly recommend everyone go and check that out as well. And I'm going to leave and see what's happening, so continue.
Let's get out of here.
So that's good.
Let's get out of here.
So that's good.
I've been a police officer for 35 years. I've never been so angry in my entire life. I've never sat in a courtroom where a judge sat and looked at a police officer confined to a wheelchair, heard the widow speak of how their lives have changed. Let's get out of here.
So that's good.
50 miles per hour, dragging Officer Veve for blocks. Veve somehow was able to get off several shots before he was thrown and critically injured.
17-year-old Justin Morrell, no stranger to the criminal justice system. The young man who nearly killed NYPD officer Dalsh Veve back in 2017, leaving him confined to a wheelchair for life.
To muster the strength to stand before the person that tried to kill her husband and then hear a judge say, let's all be quiet in the courtroom. We're going to let this mud out. And that's effectively what she's done. She spit on every shield, on every chest in this city. Let's get out of here.
So that's good.
Let's get out of here. Let's get out of here.
That moment, the second shot, you guys are staring at each other, and you said there was a look in his eye like something you'd never seen before.
Mm-hmm.
You described it as a demon.
Mm-hmm. It was a very, very intense image he was presenting.
They are often connected to big drug cartels. They are not just gangs of kids anymore. They are often the kinds of kids that are called super predators. No conscience, no empathy. We can talk about why they ended up that way, but first we have to bring them to heel. And the president has asked the FBI to launch
the officer, Daniel Pantaleo.
No, move out the way. No.
It's my brother. We live here.
Back up this way. Everybody now back up. It's now going to become a crisis. Back up.
And we expect our police officers to stop these bandits? How dare this judge? I've never been so embarrassed as an officer of this court, as a police officer, as a citizen of this city, to know that my family, these men and women, will have to walk the same streets as this mutt. Let's get out of here.
Say that again.
Wow.
Yeah.
So just take a breather for that.
I know that kind of sucked the energy out of the room a little bit. I apologize about that.
Oh, please don't.
Not at all.
It wasn't your fault. You were simply telling the story. And I completely agree with what you said earlier about the work. I don't think you used this word, but it definitely visualized what, it illustrated what Jillian was talking about in her film Revolution. This is the revolution, or this is the cause. This is one of the causes of the revolution, why we need the revolution not to be televised. We need boots on the ground. We need activism. I want to talk a little bit about the way you created the film. The only audio that we hear is the police officer who says he's never been more angry than this moment. And the first thing we hear is, let's get out of here. And then we hear that later on. I really enjoyed that. There was like breadcrumbs. Let's get out of here. Where are we going? And because often we see films told from 1 to 10, or occasionally we may see a film that takes us 10 to 1. It might tell the story backwards, but you didn't really you told the story like sort of at the mid, not really at the end, but it was like not really at the beginning. It was, this is a part of the story. Let's get out of here. First thing we hear, we see the streets of New York, and I just was so drawn to it, the way you told the story. I so appreciate your method, the way that you're practicing your filmmaking, especially with this film, because it is so different than what I've seen before. And it was very attractive in a way that just pulls you, makes you watch it, makes you interested. How did you approach it? What came first? Which idea came first? Can you talk about that a little?
Yeah, I pretty much just kind of dived right into it. There was a clip of a police commissioner who was talking about the incident that happened between Justin Morrell and Dash Veve. And it was his emotionality, it was a lot of his emotionalisms that really pulled me into it. And also it was his aggression, the aggressive tonality attached to his emotionalism that also pulled me into it too. And so from there, I started to kind of think about, well, who is the other person? Like, where is the narrative about that person? Where's the narrative about, their families and, what they're going through during this moment? And so what I wanted to do was I wanted the audience to jump right into this moment where this, commissioner is talking about this one-sided narrative, and then kind of contrast that with the actual story of the individual, right? Giving the individual a moment to have his moment, essentially, right? To reclaim, you know, who he is, reclaim his humanity for just that one split second. And it was a really good decision because I screened it to a couple of other people, and at first they were kind of concerned that it was a little bit jarring, right? To just jump us into, you know, this narrative, right? Jump us into the middle of the narrative. But eventually, you know, once they watched it a couple of times over again, like, you know, one of my professors, she absolutely agreed that it was a good decision to jump us into almost like interrupting this narrative as it's happening, right? It's almost like changing the channel, but then coming back again. I actually had one professor who, when she saw the film and the constant audio of this police commissioner, you know, being very loud and aggressive, her reaction towards it was just like, she was so surprised and she was so sad, she was angry, she had all these emotions going on. And part of what I was trying to do with the film was trying to play on that, trying to really extrapolate what the police commissioner was talking about, and almost hold on to that emotion, hold on to his anger, hold on to his, you know, his fear, honestly, and then use it to show other images of where this is what this kind of language have resulted in, right? We see Eric Garner, you know, there's other, you know, instances of police interaction with Black bodies that I didn't include, but that narrative, that aggression, that, you know, over the top emotionalism, that identification with your own in-group instead of looking at the humanity of the other person. These are all the things I was trying to expose, trying to have the audience reconsider, trying to have the audience think about, chew over. And so I also didn't want it to be flashy, like most films and most films that deal with this topic. And by flashy, I mean, there's not a lot of music, right? You notice it's very dry, right? You're just getting the rawness of what's happening, right? So I did that for a reason, because I didn't want the audience to be distracted by the fantastic music and the score. I just wanted them to focus on the words and focus on the visuals and the contrast between the words and the visuals. So yeah, I think I did a pretty excellent job here. And my only concern with it was there was a lot of text. And although the text was great because it was indexical, right? It was identifying that moment and that story and that particular individual and the police officer. I felt, especially as I was watching the film over again, I felt like it took away from it sometimes, because it was distracting us from what we're actually seeing. And so the idea of the film was to force us to see that. It was to force the audience to confront the violence, the injustice, right? So using the text as indexicality, although it solidifies and concretizes that moment between the officer and the individual, it also kind of takes us away from it, because we're not getting to see the full full visuality of what's going on. So that's a downside that I thought about a great deal, and I updated the film, and I took a lot of that stuff out. And now I feel like the updated version is more stronger, because a lot of the distractions, especially the textual distractions, are away. So now what we have is this raw film, which is how it was supposed to be, where we're, you know, looking at a story from one side, that side being the police commissioner, and then also looking at it from a different side. So it was an opportunity to get the audience to try to question, you know, which narrative is true, and then like what narratives do we often hear, and, you know, try to take that narrative and relate it back to yourself, right? So I try to make the film so the audience are not just taking in what they're seeing, right, from the news and stuff. I try to make the film so they're also questioning their own perspective, their own misconceptions, their own stereotypes, and about Black people and about Black representation.
I agree. I think you did a very, very good job with that. And I didn't have a problem with the way the story was told as far as a timeline at all. I didn't find it jarring. I appreciated being like, you're in the story. The story has started. You know,
right.
I really appreciate that very much. And I keep finding myself thinking the words that the police officer, was he the commissioner that was speaking in front of the media?
Mm-hmm.
I keep hearing one of his statements was that that we have to walk the streets with this mutt.
Right. Yeah.
And I thought, the streets are not, we're not good enough to walk the streets. I mean, someone who has committed a crime is not worthy of walking the streets of New York. Is that what you're saying? That sounds like what you're saying. Like, you're not just if you've done your time, or you've, you know, the law, the courts have decided, you know, they've made a judgment, and now that, so all of those things.
I mean,
go into play with me.
There's that too, but there's riddled throughout the film is just a lot of, you know, subtle jabs at, you know, Black people, right? You know, the idea of a mutt, like we talked about before we had this conversation, you know, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's, you know, people are mixed. We're all mixed, right? But we see with this police commissioner, it was important for him to emphasize that, right? And so for me, the question was, why is he emphasizing that, right? Why is he emphasizing that, if not to, you know, draw our attention to, you know, the ways in which we're supposed to view Blackness, which is, you know, negative, aggressive, animal, right? Rather than, you know, human, you know, a person just like himself. And so you see in his language, there's always this kind of like communicative, like distancing that he's doing with himself and with people that are, you know, Black. So he uses the word mutt. He uses, you know, he calls them bandits, you know, words that are, you know, criminally, you know, they're triggering, right? And, you know, they're not accurate. And so even with his language, before we even get to, you know, the news media, there's already this, you know, through language, there's already this disassociation between, you know, him himself and the other, right? So there's this othering happening, you know, and so that's really what pulled me in. And that's why I wanted to, you know, play that audio over and over again. And I like that you picked up on the you know, let's get out of here. That was just a consequence of me playing the audio over and over again. You know, I didn't really think that would, you know, have such a strong connection to the story itself. But after you pointed that out, it actually makes a lot of sense, because oftentimes in these situations, there is this let's get out of here-ness, right? After this happens, we, you know, take Brown, right? And, you know, Officer Darren Wilson, when, you know, that altercation happened, his body was left in the street and just exposed for over 18 minutes. Nobody, you know, thought to put a cloth on him or anything. Even his mother was trying to do that, and they were telling her not to do that, right? So there was this like, you know, oh, this has happened, so let's get out of here. And so what I hope to do was to try to illuminate some of that, and by showing other clips where we see this let's get out of here-ness after police brutality on Black bodies.
Yeah, and I love the repetition of it over and over again, because it just hammers it home for, and I, you know, being a Black woman, it's visible to me, like whether it's audibly visible or visually visible, I see it, and I hope that others who identify as the other can hear it and see it as well, as a way, because as we say, you know, we need action. We need all in the community to act together for a common, because we are, you know, we talk about Black Lives Matter because so often historically to the colonists, the colonizers. Black lives didn't matter. Brown lives didn't matter. Those, the only lives that matter are, the ones who are identifying as white in this particular century. Maybe in another few decades we'll allow you to be white, but right now you're not. So, but until that happens, I just really appreciated the filmmaking, the activism, and the art within all, encompassing, and just the idea you can do all of that. You can tell these stories in 5 minutes. So I want to get into Maria's film so that everyone can see it, and then I'd also would like to hear Maria's take on art, action, and activism, because you also work in the theater. So there's, you have a twofold thing right now. You stumbled, you're accidental filmmaker. Hey, what's up? What's up?
All my family,
like representing with the pick in your hair.
Yeah, they're not camera shy.
I want to put. I gotta get my pick. Don't be camera shy. What's up? Yeah, I'm famous. I want to give a shout out to Booba May and my friends Abubakar. This is wonderful. I love it. It's real.
Right.
So we're combining things, because when I saw Léwugà's film, when I finished it, first thing I said, oh, that's a poem. That's cinematic poetry right there. And so, we've got a person who identifies as a poet, and then we have Maria, who's writing a series of pieces that have to do with COVID. And so you stumbled upon filmmaking, but you're also deep in theater. And so I want to hear, after we see the film, how you combine or collaborate with those disciplines to activate your art and, to get people to listen and changing. So, Teresa, can you play COVID Chronicles 2 for us? I'm loving this. I want this job again, Lucia. This is really awesome. We should do this at least once a month. Yay! Introduce new filmmaker.
COVID Chronicle 2. Plastic cups start World War III. It's assumed that all this time spent in close quarters would inevitably lead to tempers flaring. While that assumption has some foundation in the truth, we've all seen it, and I've seen it play out in my household in small and often hilarious ways. Simple things become a point of contention, and part of me thinks it's the variety that arguing adds to the everyday, mundane sludge of living through a pandemic. That simple thing for my household was plastic cups. Yes, you heard me right, plastic cups. These are the plastic cups you typically get from ordering drinks to go at a restaurant, or in my family, when you buy pre-made desserts from the Asian market. While preparing some post-lunch dessert, my mom asked me to save the plastic cup when I was done with it. She said she wanted to feel like she was drinking coffee at a restaurant. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the practice, many Vietnamese restaurants in my area, at least, typically serve café soda in these plastic to-go cups. At this point, we had been in quarantine for about 3 weeks. I didn't question my mom's request. Parents. They truly slaved in order to make sure I could have anything I could ever want. In return, I worked my butt off in school, since that was the one thing I could control and the one thing they asked of me. Fast forward to this quarantine, and I miss being able to dine at all the hottest restaurants in town with my boyfriend, where we could easily drop upwards of $200 on a meal for just the two of us. I can already hear my mom at this fact. But what she doesn't know is that I log all the places I go to that I want to later take her and my dad. It is my hope that as I continue to work hard in my career, I can pay back my parents for everything they've given me. I know that no matter what I buy or give them, it will never compare to what they've given me. The least I could do right now was grant my mom her request to save some plastic cups. What I did not know was that she wanted me to save the lid too. Fast forward a few hours later, and my mom was gearing up to prepare her restaurant-style café soda. To her horror, she didn't find the lid with the cup. Uh-oh. You guessed it. The first shots of World War III. An! Nắp của Liam đâu rồi? What had I done? I had inadvertently costed my father his life, but before things got too heated, I diverted the fury spewing from my mother. I calmly informed her that the lid to the one cup was on the shelf of cups next to our sink. She found that lid and immediately began the interrogation on where the second lid was, which is when I told her I accidentally threw the lid out because I didn't know she wanted me to save that as well. This then provided my father the opportunity to return fire with sentiments of, "See? Your mom is always blaming me for everything." Luckily, this was a short war with very few casualties. The final battle ended in laughter, and all was well again. My parents' relationship for most of my life often felt utilitarian. I knew that together they made a great team that cared for and raised my brother and I without much complaint. There wasn't overtly much affection shown, at least any that I witnessed as a child. But now that both my brother and I are in our 20s, and for the most part self-sufficient, it seems they have the opportunity to be Tuấn and Nga again. I will attest that at times it can be absolutely barf-worthy, but most of the time I find it incredibly sweet, a model for my own relationship. My parents bicker like any couple, but they've ended nearly every fight in laughter. That is a victory to be proud of, considering all they've gone through. Childhood trauma, split families, becoming a refugee, coming to a new country, finding love, starting their own family, finding a means to provide for said family, and everything in between. You would think they would spend their lives being more bitter, more cynical to the way the world works, especially now. But even through a global pandemic, my parents can make something as menial as plastic cups a powder keg, while at the same time finding hope and the will to do something meaningful every day. The dichotomous nature of their interactions brings me pause. That hope, that laughter, and that love has sustained them through nearly everything life has thrown at them. So despite all the despair, the hopelessness, the worry, and the dread, I choose to laugh too. I choose to find comfort in being able to argue about the little things and make up in a fit of laughter.
So
good. Thank you.
So good.
Yes. It was very, very nice. That was like all three of you have such different ways of like approaching your work, and the outcome, the goal was also interesting to watch and listen to. So, accidental filmmaker, tell us a little about how you're activating activism through art and collaborating through theater and now filmmaking and animation, writing. I'll be all up in your face. I'll try to move a little out of your face.
Yeah, so the artist activation piece for me always made sense because I internally have always been an artist. I'm not a technically trained artist in any way, shape, or form. My accidental filmmaking is just one piece of that. I'm kind of a jack of all trades. I'm willing to learn all different kinds of things. I actually went to school for political science and international relations. And now I'm the program director at Ujima Company, which is a theater company. So for me, the activism part of it made much more sense. And the art was merely the vehicle in which I taught that activism. So I always approach it as every artist is an activist. They might not know it quite yet. They might not know what their activism is, but every artist is speaking the language of activism. I've always seen it that way because like Jillian mentioned, for some people, conversation doesn't work, or reading something doesn't work, or stating things in an essay doesn't work. But when they experience art, art is the language that permeates the soul. It is the way in which messages can connect to people emotionally in a way you can't get anywhere else. And that's how I fell into theater. I did stage work before I became an arts administrator. And whenever I was able to do shows, it was because of the emotions that got drawn out of doing those performances, the rehearsal process that was involved, the actual production, when you're actually in front of an audience, and then what they give back to you as an actor. All of those things are so hard to put down on paper, but when you do it and you feel it, it all seems to make sense. So the funniest part for me in this whole experience really is my parents still speak pretty broken English. So I am bilingual. I speak both Vietnamese and English. But as an actor, I love Shakespeare, and that's Old English. And no matter how many times I told them that they didn't have to come, my lovely immigrant parents would always sit in all of my Shakespearean shows and pretend they know what's going on. And they're like, that was lovely. And I believe them. I truly believe them, because when it comes to art, even if you don't know essentially what's being said, you can feel it when you're in the room. So I'm glad I was able to find this new medium of film and animation work to tell stories in a way that makes sense for other people, for other filmmakers, for other folks who like to experience story through visual cues. To me, it's just all translation. I didn't speak English growing up. I didn't even know what a fork was when I was a kid. And then I learned to love the language. And then I learned to love the language of theater. And now I've learned to love the language of film.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. You know, we've gone over time, which is great for us, because I should have warned Lucia that I would go over time, because I just like to talk so much. I've been trying really hard not to talk too much, make sure all of you talk. But before we wrap it up, I know that sometimes we want to ask each other questions. So I want to open it up for the three of you. If there is anything that you want to ask each other about your films or about process, something that I didn't bring up. Is there anything?
You're putting us on the spot.
Yeah, well, okay. Well, you can think about that for a second.
I mean, I have a question for Maria.
Yes.
Yeah. So when you're putting all these photos together and you're getting ready to, decide which one to use, like photos of your family, were there like any photos you didn't use because it didn't fit with the story, or how did you decide which photo to use to better tell the story?
Yeah, great question, because I debated between just drawing out all of the pieces and the people and doing that, and then I decided to do photographs, because a lot of my parents' stories live in these photo albums in our house. And I remember as a kid growing up, flipping through and not fully understanding what those stories were, but knowing that each photograph contained how many decades of stories, how many backstories that I don't know of. So when I went through to choose those pictures, I picked ones that were emotionally connected to myself, things that I knew background-wise what those things mean. So the film itself is actually very multi-layered, because I view it in a certain capacity, and then when my parents viewed it, they cried. But it's mostly because those photographs for them created this storyline that they didn't even remember until I presented it in this way. So it's a legacy piece in and of itself. It's a piece about my family history, but spanning generations.
I guess I also have a question for you, Maria.
Okay.
Okay, so I just want to know, with your parents not being originally from America, do they have like an opinion on the social justice issues that are happening right now? Like, how are they processing what's happening, and does it change their opinion about the promises of America.
Yeah, so we've actually had this conversation in our immigrant circle, I guess, if you could call it that. So the Vietnamese American community has been talking about this very issue, about the convergence between being
Jillian, I'm going to ask you to repeat your question because we had some little we had some technical problems. Did everyone hear? Because I didn't hear the question.
Oh,
did anyone? Did you hear the question, Maria?
Yeah, I had a question.
Yeah, could you repeat it, Jillian?
Yeah, no, I was just asking if her parents, seen as though they're not from America, how they feel about like the social climate right now, and if it has changed their opinion on like the American dream and the American promise.
Yeah, so for my parents, it's funny because my father is, I guess, if you had to compare the two, more Vietnamese than my mother. So my mother is half Vietnamese, half African American. And for her, the issues that are at play right now hit home in a way that she hasn't personally had to deal with being a mixed person. So I like to say that those of us who are mixed race get to fly under the radar because people don't know what racism to use against us. So we get a pass for that reason. But for my parents, the conversations that they have are around, you cannot be living in a just society when there are people who are oppressed, because they understand what that oppression looks like when it comes from the government. So what's happening now is scary because it reminds them of things that they have fled from. It reminds them of a place where the people in power are the people that are conducting the oppression and saying that that is okay. And for a lot of people in the Vietnamese and American community, we're trying to really think about how we have been complacent in that. In order to protect ourselves, are we trampling on our Black and brown brothers and sisters? And what's really powerful that's happening right now are people like me, the children of these refugee and immigrant communities who have been blessed by the opportunities that we've been given, are pointing the finger back at our ancestors and going, that's not okay. We can't just skirt past all of those things in order to climb up the social ladder, because no matter what, we are still under the white supremacist society that caused us to be our country in the first place. So yeah, there is definitely a reckoning that's happening across all the communities.
That's wonderful. That is such a great, thank you so much for that, because that gets back into, like, you know, us being together, being one complete race. And you know, we cannot be, if one group is oppressed, we're not free. Thank you so much. I hate saying just want to think about that for a minute. Thank you, Jillian. You could be my co-host. Yeah. Léwugà, Jillian, Maria, do any of you want to share something that's coming up or something that you would like us to be aware of, either in your career or in a group that you're with? What would you like to share with us? What do you want us to know about? Léwugà, and then Jillian, and then Maria?
Sure.
I don't really have any projects coming up right now. I'm just really trying to focus on, starting school again. I'm going into my second year of graduate school at UB. So there's a lot of adjustments going on the academic side, just in terms of how we're responding to COVID, and just making sure that we're keeping safe while on campus. So I'm just thinking about that and thinking about getting back to classes and stuff. And I'm actually trying to stay away from making films for a while now, only because I get inspired by things. I'm not, a filmmaker that, has a specific idea of what he wants to do. I just kind of, pick up something from, like, maybe a commercial or a conversation with somebody, and then that kind of evolves into an actual film. And so I'm taking a lot of the classes that I'm taking for this semester doesn't have anything to do with production. So I'm just really trying to get myself a breather away from production and just kind of letting the inspiration come wherever it comes from. So.
And you do have a blog, though. Have
do.
you been updating that with many of your stories? And it would be great to share your blog and maybe get some more followers and readers. So can you please give us your address so we can keep on watching or reading about what you're
so my blog is called Intellectual Crime Scene, and it's pretty much a space where I talk about a lot of what we're discussing here. I talk about race, I talk about gender, I talk about identity, I talk about representation. And I've had the blog for about 7 years now, and it's got a good readership. There are people who are interested in it. There are people who are moved by it. There are people who talk about the stories. And for me, it's just my role. I see my role as the writer, as the creator of that website, just to give a space for all these different kind of stories to have their own moment. And so it's a lovely space if you guys want to go and check it out. There's a lot of interesting stories.
I have, and I will come back. Intellectual Crime Scene.
Okay.
You posted it on Facebook, and I was like, oh, I gotta log onto that. I gotta know what he's doing.
Yep.
That was a few months ago. I didn't realize you had it on for seven years. So that's awesome. So check out Intellectual Crime Scene by Léwugà Benson. You will know what is going on. You will know what he's thinking about, the people that he's talking to, and you will have an alarm clock to become more socially awoke. Jillian, I like how I just put that in there. Jillian, what's going on? What do we need to be aware of?
Yeah, so I just started a new job as the Director of Leadership Development at Open Buffalo. Thank you.
Congratulations!
Thank you. Hard at work, getting people registered to vote, and filling out their 2020 census.
Did we lose her?
You froze for a second, so we're just gonna wait until you come back. But she's not pretending, or else we'd see something going.
Oh, can you hear me? My connection is so shoddy right now. Okay. And I also have a poetry book on Amazon. It's called For the Culture. I'm working on my second poetry book. And I have a podcast called Atypical Social Worker. And it's just about how to navigate the world working with people, being an other. Social work is the field of people. So if you work with people, you are in some way a social worker. So this podcast just kind of explores, how do we code switch? How do we navigate life? How do we create connections in our own communities? How do we avoid having to code switch? And how do we stand strong in the way we look, when everybody has straight blonde hair and we have dreadlocks and things like that. So check out the podcast and follow me on on Instagram at J Hanesworth. I am always posting what I'm working on. I'm at all the rallies and protests. So if you want to keep up with that, you can just follow me.
Great. So J Hanesworth on Instagram, and Atypical Social Worker podcast. Check your Apple Podcasts or however you find podcasts, Spotify, Google where you can get the podcast and click on it and listen to it. So you can, and because when I think about defunding the police, I always think about funding social workers.
Social workers, absolutely. Absolutely.
So I give social workers a badge and a uniform, but a more comfortable uniform because it's hot out there.
Yeah.
Right.
So, thank you so much. Maria, what are you doing?
Most of my life, 90% of my life is Ujima. So check out Ujima Company Inc. on all of the social medias. Our website is ujimacoinc.org, where right now we are having an open call submission for artwork that is in tribute to the Black Lives Matter movement. So very much things that we're talking about today. So if you are an artist, a creative, anybody who just wants to create something, please submit. Our submissions are due on Saturday. And then Maria, as as a solo artist outside of Ujima. I write on Medium, and you can find me at Maria Ta. That is where you'll find the rest of the COVID chronicles. There's 6 of them so far, as well as some other pieces that I've written.
Great. So that's Ujima is doing. Am I correct? Because you came in and out. Was it #ArtThatHeals?
Yes.
Is that the submission?
Yes.
Okay. So we're looking. Ujima is looking for submissions. They close on Saturday. Art That Heals. That can be films, performances, readings, anything that you can sort of upload.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. And then more of the COVID chronicles. Maria.me. Or is it
at Medium at Maria Ta.
At medium.mariata.
Yeah.
Did I do it right? Okay,
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
Good. All right. Because I want to read the rest of that. I should submit something to Art That Heals. I don't know, maybe.
Can I say something?
Léwugà, yes.
I just want to say, could we take a moment just to give a round of applause to Annette Taylor, please, for hosting?
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
You're such a great MC. You have so much energy, and I love it. Thank you.
Incredible.
Thank you. It's just just a actress who wants to get on stage, or teacher who wants people to listen to her. Yay! I want people to be excited because I'm excited. I loved all of your work so much, and I love this conversation. I can't wait to see more of your work. Léwugà, I can't wait for you to graduate so you want to make more films. Or the breadth and the space to make more films is more open. And I must, before we close out, I just want to ask one quick question, and it's about microfilms and short films. Have each of you made these films 5 minutes or less because you think that can be a prelude to longer films, or is this the sort of size film that you think is the future, or is it, were there any constraints, or would you like to make a longer film? Anyone jump right in there.
Yeah, I'm usually used to making films that are short. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, go. Jillian, let Léwugà speak, and then we'll go to Jillian.
Okay, yeah. I'll be quick. Yeah, I'm usually used to making films that are, 3 minutes, 5 minutes. And so the time constraint wasn't an issue for me. I actually like it that it's, kind of tight, because then you really have an opportunity to really focus and emphasize on what the story is, right? Because when you have too much time, then, the information gets lost somewhere in the sauce. But if you have, a time constraint, then you can really focus about delivering the specific message using specific images and visuals to communicate that story. And so I like the time constraint. I've never found an issue with it.
That's great. Jillian, what do you think?
The film is however long the poem is, and I memorize all of my pieces. So I try not to write a piece that is longer than 5 minutes, because I have about 40 poems memorized, and they are all between 3 and 5 minutes, and it is very difficult. So it's just my personal time limit, because I know I'm going to memorize it.
I hear that.
That's great. I don't memorize poems anymore. I simply ask for a music stand. Maria?
5 minutes is kind of a sweet spot in terms of attention span for a lot of folks. I work primarily with youth in past lives and in this life. So 5 minutes, whether you are an adult or a child, I know you at least watch it from beginning to end.
That's for sure. I have found with the onslaught of the internet and social media in the last 20 years, 5 minutes is definitely great for me. I will watch 3, 4, 5 5-minute films in a row before I watch one feature. This is great. Thank you all so much. I have a plug. I have a book that is out. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it on my website. You can get it at the publisher's website, which is West 44 Books. It's called Dreams on Fire, written by Annette Daniels Taylor. It's a young adult novel written in verse, and it all takes place in Buffalo, about a young girl who's going to private school And yeah, it's hard being a Black kid in a private school anywhere in this country. So it's about that and what happens after that. So thank you all for listening and tuning in to MicroMania, this social justice panel. Thank you, Jillian Hanesworth. Thank you, Maria Ta. And thank you, Léwugà Benson. Thank all of you for joining us. Thank you, Lucia, for starting the MicroMania Film Festival. Please watch all the films. Watch all the films on the MicroMania Film Festival. Watch every single one of them. Talk back. Go to the next panel, which is Lucia's going to tell you about that. And support filmmakers, support art, support Black filmmakers, support filmmakers of color, support women filmmakers, support Buffalo filmmakers, support New York filmmakers, support Western New York, support artists. Watch our work, talk about our work, book us, like our work, follow us, and know what's going on, and stay woke, and get that alarm clock going. Listen to the podcast. Go to Léwugà's blog and check out Maria's stories. And I'm Annette Daniels Taylor, and I'm pretty done for the day.
I'm going to do my best.
Lucia Costello.
Thank you. I'm going to do my best to get all those links on the event page and in the comments here. And Annette, I expect you're going to watch every single one of the 126 5-minute films that are in the festival, right?
Right? 126 times 5 minutes.
126. Well, they're not all 5 minutes long. It comes to about 5 hours of content. But that being said, I honor each and every one of your beautiful voices. Thank you for sharing yourselves. Thank you for sharing your films. I'm going to cry. Thank you for trusting me. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucia.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely.
I'll have you back again. I plan on doing regular content. So you are all welcome to sign off if you want now, as I just rattle off the next events.
Great. Long live MicroMania Film Festival.
Thank you,
Goodbye,
everyone.
everyone. Have a great night.
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Bye, Léwugà.
Bye, guys.
Thank you, everybody, for watching. I think that this was probably recorded, so you are able to view it again. So I'm just going to take one more second. So join us again Wednesday, July 29th. So this Wednesday at 12 p.m. for Comedy and Micro, hosted by Mark Duplass, where we speak with 3 excellent filmmakers, Seton K. Smith, Kristen Ballard, Sonia Sebastian, yes, and Mark Duplass. And then at 4 p.m., we have Queer Voices in Micro with Lee Campbell, Jordana Valerie Allen Shim, and Terry Jones, who is Seneca from the Wolf Clan. Thank you so much.